Hi, I'm Susan. I'm from Worldpeacefull, and I've felt inspired to talk about democracy actually. It's interesting the amount of themes that I feel compelled to really explore. I'm going to start with meditation because I really believe in becoming still and allowing oneself to sort of get into a flow that connects with sort of the truth of matters. So I'll start with a meditation first. Breathing in, breathing out. Breathing in inspiration, breathing out love, breathing in truthfulness, breathing out love into the world. Breathing in kindness, breathing out empathy, breathing in peace. See, democracy is really, the breathing in and out really with democracy is the different voices being heard. Democracy is not, I feel, a Western notion. Often in other countries, they've stated that democracy is a Western notion and individualism, in the way that they see it, does not reflect the rest of the world. But all really democracy is having a voice. It's being heard and listening. That's what it really is. I often reflect on the Greek Agora and the power of the Greeks in terms of their formulation of democracy. And certainly they've had their challenges, their wars, conquests. But the notion of democracy has really come through hard experience. They were great truth speakers in the ancient Greek times. They spoke fully the truth. This is something I've just found out, and I was very, very pleased to hear it, because even since I was a very young child, when I stayed silent, there was something intuitive within me that kind of reminded me the importance of speaking up. And the speaking up actually gave me a sense of empowerment. But at the time when I was a child, I didn't know that that's what that feeling good was about. And I have noted, because I was a quiet child when I was young, and I had more outgoing family members who all spoke up. I could easily be lost in their speaking up. Kind of forced me to, stand my ground more. Otherwise, I think I would have been a much quieter person today. But I've definitely felt that the speaking up is really important. It's like you have to bring out of yourself what's inside. And people will find channels to do that through art. That's why the arts are incredibly important, because they're channels for expression. And expression is sharing that inner world with the rest of the world. That's why I do videos, because I'm sharing. My expression is in service to humanity. That's why I do it. it's not really about changing others, it's about changing myself. Because the more I speak up, the more I learn. You know, the more I speak up, the more I can hear when other people respond and reply to that conversation. That's why conversations are very important. When we really listen to difference. The contrasting ideas is what creates the innovation. This is why artists are very, very good at developing new ideas, because through the arts, there's no limit. And this is a skill. Art is a skill. I remember when I worked with Gillian Lynn in London, she was the woman who choreographed Cats. And I had the privilege of working with her. And I remember asking her, you know, about creativity. And I said, how did you become creative? She was a choreographer, so she was constantly working with design and dance and, doing musicals. And she looked at me and she said, well, really, creativity, it's like exercising a muscle. You've just got to keep exercising it. And, I could see the wisdom in that. You just got to keep working on creativity. It's like when I write poetry, I keep writing more and more. I feel inspired to write poetry, which is why I do it. And I found that it is a channel for my own expression. And when I write particularly uplifting words, I feel this great sense of connectedness to the rest of the world. It unifies. So through my own effort and intent to seek for truth, what I often find is that it ends up revealing to me the nature of unity, the nature of acceptance of diversity. And that word acceptance is the unity, you see. I remember when I met Edward de Bono many, many years ago, when I wrote to him when I was an economics student up in Brisbane. I was at Griffith University. And I remember I really wanted to go to his conference. And I've told this story before, so bear with me if you've heard it. For some of you who have read my book. I don't think I wrote it in my book, actually. No, I didn't. But anyway, I just wrote him a cheeky note. And, I was really stating that there are lots of lateral thinking students that couldn't afford his conference. And, of course, he invited me to come. And I was really thrilled because he rang me. I went, wow. Just through one note, he rang me. So I went to his conference and I sat in the audience and saw Edward up on the stage doing abstract drawings and pictures. And what he was trying to teach the audience was to look at problems from a different perspective. He had various techniques to help the mind to move out of its track, its linear track of thinking. Because with the Descartes, the reductionist type thinking, the linear thinking, we think this, then we think that, then we think this, and we look for a logic. And we feel very comfortable in that logic. But what Edward introduced to the world was lateral thinking, which was to really break that pattern and come at things from a different angle. Now, I find with poetry, I'm able to do that because there's no ego involved in what I'm writing. I just write with a flow. And typically I share it because I don't even feel like I own it. So it's always, in a sense, sharing as part of that unity perspective, which again is a lateral perspective. It's not a linear logical, it's more of a creative way of seeing. Anyway, I remember after, we had actually a debate in the break, and this was the door analogy where he and I just had a bit of a debate, and it was about 10 doors. And he said, what's the probability of getting a goat behind the door? And I said, 1 in 10 would be the normal answer to this, but I said it's I think of the way, how did I say it? I said it was you either get it or you don't. That's right. I said it was 50-50. Today I would say 0-1, on off. So I basically said you're either meant to be in front of the door or you're not. Now, he didn't agree with that, and I said, well, we'll just have to agree to disagree. So again, I guess in essence, our perspectives were different in the sense that he was seeing a probability, which actually is logic. I was actually probably coming at it creatively in truth because I was seeing it was either meant to be or not. In other words, reality turns up or it doesn't. Reality is in the moment, whereas others might see reality, in a form of argument that this is the reality. I've done heaps of research and this is the reality of what's going on. But I know, even as an analyst, that the questions that we ask affect that reality. So typically as an analyst, you would look at the universe in which you're analysing, you would frame it. You would frame it through a paradigm, a question, a hypothesis. You would pose that hypothesis, and then you would seek through research to prove it, or you might argue against it, which is very common in argument. This is the sort of, logic type approach. And, the lateral approach looks at the world differently. So to break out of different ways of thinking, what I've often felt, when I've done my own research, I tend to get a feel for the topic first. I'm not thinking about it, I actually get a feel for it. I even get a feel for the materials that I study. There's an intuitive aspect to the way that I do research, and I used to always make it very real. So if I was researching a topic, I would actually go to the place of that subject physically and walk through it. I'll give one example of a lateral approach. I actually did some research for a council in respect of, believe it or not, graveyards. You think not the happiest places, but they actually are. And it was a crematorium they were planning, and they wanted to do some polling in the area to find out what people thought about that. And so as part of my preliminary research, I spent time walking around the cemetery and having a look at this site and what it meant to people. And to my utter amazement, I realised that this was a place of great love. And I had a look at the headstones, and there were all these tributes. And of course, they have photos on them, so you're actually seeing people that are no longer here. And some of them were, obviously babies, some of them were young children, some of them were teenagers who'd had accidents. Others were, in their prime and they died. Others were obviously elderly and died and were buried next to their partner. Or there could be the whole family. Some of them had mausoleums because they really loved them and they had a lot of money. Others were tiny crosses. If they were military, there was just a cross. Or there was a plaque, and maybe someone kept bringing flowers to that site. So I remember being very moved by the experience and very surprised at how interesting the research actually turned out to be. And then, of course, we did a phone survey and found out what people thought about these sites. So coming back to lateral thinking, it's for me, it was very much about combining the two, the intellect and the intuitive, or the feeling, the sensory part of the intelligence, in order to see more. So I was actually a very good researcher as a result of that, because I feel my way through research. I also had a healthy respect for data, and I tested the data through sample sizes. And I wanted to see if the outcomes changed when I reduce the sample size, and you can do that statistically You can reduce the sample size. You can choose a number of interviews for a data set, and then you might run some frequencies across it. You might do some cross tabulations and get an idea of how much the percentage or the basis change. And that gives me an idea of how does the confidence intervals work, standard error of the estimate. So I played with that because I wanted to really get a feel for, does the maths work? And what I found was, in combination with the qualitative research, which is the more in-depth, exploratory, lateral form of research, I found in combination they worked very well. And they did. And you could even equate that to the masculine and feminine. As I said to a friend today, the feminine's not necessarily female and the masculine's not necessarily male. It's a certain sensitivity or receptivity in the feminine. And with the masculine, there's more of that sort of pushing forward energy, that more competitive energy, more outward. You could even say one side's more reflective, the other side's more outward. That's why in combination they balance. So how does this all reflect back on democracy? Well, how we think and how we feel determines what we see and what we hear. And of course, democracy is really about hearing and speaking. It's about, in a sense, creating the world we want through the mixing it up, the clashing it up of different viewpoints, which gives a really powerful dynamic to innovative change. It's not to protect ourselves from differences, it's actually to invite differences so that we can expand who we are. And in that expansion, that's where it gets exciting. It's really about growing and learning from all of us. Everyone has something unique to offer, everyone. When I was a market analyst and I used to ring people and ask their opinions, it was really my experience of learning about democracy and learning about listening. When you're an analyst, you have to ring them up and you ask them questions and you find out what they actually think. And in this case, it wasn't a conversation, it was truly listening and recording everything they said. So I became very good at noting down what was being said. And through that listening, not offering an opinion as an early training in a sense, but really trying to hear what they have to say. So being an analyst was really great because, if you like, that was developing the receptive side of myself to really hear what was being communicated. And I can remember doing some focus groups, and I remember in the heart of the focus group, I was obviously asking questions. What do you think? Yes, that's interesting. And this person would then give another perspective. And I had to make sure that I balanced all the perspectives so that there was no one dominating the group, that everybody actually had a say and was respected and had equal time. And I believed that I knew what the group was saying. So if I was debriefed later, I would be confident that, what I'd heard in the group was pretty much the theme. But what I found out, again through experience and hard work, was when I transcribed the tapes, really listening word for word to what everyone said, I sat back and I went, oh my goodness, what I'd understood was perceived. It wasn't actually what the group was saying. That's when I became aware of my own filter, that I was only hearing of what was interesting to me in that group discussion, and then believing that was the theme of the group. So when I typed up their words and analysed it properly, and of course I have a sort of a methodology where I'm very careful. Someone could be very verbose, but I won't give more weight to that, compared to someone who might actually say only a few words, but they're making their point. So what I found as an analyst is I had to kind of sit in the middle and try and find the balance in that information, not overemphasizing or underemphasizing what was communicated. I had to find a way to balance within myself that fairness so that I could then reflect back those thoughts to the client who'd paid me to do the research. And I really did it with integrity. I was very, very careful because of this sense of speaking truth. I had to do it with great integrity because someone's paying me as well for this information, and I also owed it to the people who'd given their time to share their thoughts and views. I had an obligation to make sure that I reflected it back as best I could without bias. So that for me was my early training ground in democracy. And I guess most people don't have the opportunity to actually really sit and listen without dominating the conversation or overpowering it with their viewpoint, but actually stopping and really hearing what people have to say. I've had contentious issues that I've had to do research with. Obviously I can't really say too much about some of those issues because they were to do with government, and they were issues that were very contentious at the time. And my job was to run focus groups and find out what people thought about this topic. Now, my personal beliefs was I wasn't in agreement with, in this case, an advertising campaign because of the influence I felt that campaign would have on the public. But I noted when I did the research, I stayed neutral and I stayed in integrity. I did not change one word, even though I didn't agree with the nature of the advertising. Nonetheless, I delivered the questions as they were formulated, and then I recorded dutifully what everybody had said, and then I reported it back. And that was, in a sense, me as a professional getting out of the way and really being a channel for those messages to go back to, the governing body at that time. And so that was teaching me respect of those who actually differ quite markedly from me, in my opinion. And this was me learning that there is space for everyone's viewpoint when we stop and we listen and we respect those differences. And the great test of that is when you can sit in the room with someone who's your polar opposite, who has absolutely different viewpoint from you, when you can sit and really hear them. I've been lucky to be an analyst, and I've been lucky to be trained in conflict resolution too, where I've facilitated those dialogues to enable people to really hear each other, because you cannot resolve anything until you truly listen without interruption, to truly hear without just being seen to be, but actually hearing what's being said. And what I found in my experience is that I create a stillness inside. So when I meditated at the beginning of this, what I'm really demonstrating here, in a sense, is developing a stillness. And what I do is, when I might be tempted to say something within me, an intuitive part of myself, silences me and creates a space for that other. It's very subtle within myself. It's not even a reminding. It's something inside me pauses And I can feel myself going, hear them out. Just hear them out. Give them the space to express themselves, because what they need is to be heard. Every human being needs to be heard first. And in a sense, if we were to create a true democracy, we'd have to get good at listening to one another. I remember when I did the alternative to violence work with the Quakers, they produced that work and it came out of New York. It was an excellent program. At its very heart, it had transformative power. But essentially, it was bringing people in the community together to actually propose statements, about non-violence, and teaching them to dialogue with one another with respect. And of course, we did conflict resolution and I statements, where you own your part by saying, when you do this, I feel upset, and what I would like is this. And what we found, with these sort of community building exercises where people get to practice their voice, they also get to learn to listen. And one of the exercises, which I've taught also in schools, is concentric circles. And what you do is you have, in the case of either children or adults, you have an inside group and an outside group. Now they sit facing one another. So imagine you're on the outside group and I'm on the inside group. And the moderator might say, I want you to talk for 2 minutes about what makes you happy. So I might talk about being a clown or something for 2 minutes. Now the other party is told that they're to listen and they're not to interrupt at all. So you let the person go for the 2 minutes. You hear the whole group discussing whatever topic of interest they like for 2 minutes. And then as the moderator, you say, okay, I want you to stop. Now, the outside group, I want you to reflect back what you actually heard as close to word for word that you can. Now, the outside group doesn't know that that's expected of them. They thought they were just to listen. And so awkwardly, they all try and reflect back what they heard. And the moderator will then stop them after a minute, and then there'll be a debrief. And then the roles get reversed. But going back to the debrief, what people start to realise is that they didn't hear the other party hardly at all. They found it very difficult to remember what the person actually said. And what they realised is that they only picked up a really tiny percentage of what was said. Now, this is a great experiential learning that we actually don't listen to one another. We're in our own heads imagining and thinking, and this is why communication and dialogue is incredibly important. But even when we get into the space of dialogue, we're still not skilled on really hearing. And then when you come into even more advanced levels, you're not only hearing and reflecting back what has been spoken, but you may then move into the conflict resolution area and say, I can feel that you're angry. I can feel that you're confused. I can feel your pain around this issue. Would you like to tell me more? We don't judge them for the situation they find themselves in, but we move into the space with them as a receptive listener, because it's through the listening that people heal. Today I was having a conversation with a friend and we were discussing this very issue, that the listening is the healing. And often many people may protest, or they may speak out, or they may lift their head above the line, so to speak, and others may find that threatening. But what we have to all, I feel, learn is the expression is absolutely necessary for healing for people. The suppression of voices actually releases cortisone in the brain, and it causes stress in actual fact. There's a high level of stress happening in our society because people don't feel empowered over their own lives. The stress is coming from fear, the fear of no power, the fear of no self-determination, the fear of not being heard or understood, because very few people are trained in the area of conflict resolution or having a healthy regard for democratic discourse, which really enables the many voices to be heard. And with that, we may well discover incredibly advanced thinkers and feelers within our own society as a result of embracing the voice of the many. You know, I've traveled a lot. I've worked a lot in my life. I've moved into many, many environments, probably thousands of environments, if not more, in lots of ways. I would say that my life I've had deep experiences in my life. And as a result of that, I've actually met many people, and I've met them in so many different ways. And I've listened to many, many people, whether they've given talks or whether I bumped into them on the street. You know, I had an hour-long conversation in a park a few days ago with a woman who felt compelled to speak with me, and we talked about our lives. You know, I often have these long conversations. It's very common in my life because I'm really interested in other people. But as a result of that openness, I'm able to learn about the differences out there. And what I see is a really incredible society. And even as a market analyst, when I used to read through people's responses, you know, I was always struck by the middle ground, in a sense. Like when I used to look at you can look at the extremes in the data, or you can look at the middle of the data, the average, median, if you like. And I always found great common sense in the majority. There was always extremes on either end, but the common sense was very much in the middle mainstream. So for me, I learned that there was a wisdom in listening to that group of people, that large group of people. And if we were to talk a society, we'd say the whole society, if we're doing research on what they are thinking as a collective. That's why I'm a great believer in expression and speaking and, you know, doing the best you can to communicate ideas that my hope would inspire other people and enable people to feel free to express what they need to express. And dissent needs to be also seen in the same light as another form of expression. I'm a great believer that those who probably are your greatest critics are your greatest teachers. And if you can sit in the room with those who disapprove of you or who disagree with you or who have judged you, and if you can sit in that room with them without, anger, I think you've probably come to some level of maturity, or you've come to peace with yourself on many levels. So rather than pushing those people away, it's to invite that great diversity because it's going to teach you about yourself. And conversely, the other is going to learn about themselves through meeting the difference within you. And I believe that's what our purpose in this life is to learn to come to peace with ourselves, but to also make peace with others. And it's not an appeasement where one buckles under the weight of various opinions. It's a meeting of others and accepting their right to be who they are, as you have the right to be who you are. And if we're able to really hear and really listen to what's been said, that enables us to respect one another. So, democracy, I feel, is the lifeblood of this planet, and I think I would hate to see it disappear under the weight of a conforming type of paradigm where we all have to show up the same way. What that will do is it will actually peter out all the creativity. I don't know if it can fully do it because we're naturally creative, but it could suppress a lot of creativity. And those brilliant ideas that could have come may not come because the person hasn't felt free to really ponder or explore or pioneer something new. And I believe that the times we're moving in today are crying out for innovation. It's crying out for people to break out of a mold which is no longer serving us. And in many respects, there's a lot of business as usual where we're kind of keeping on with the same processes that will not serve certainly ourselves, but the next generation will really pay the price for our inability to break out of constructs that have come from hundreds, if not thousands of years. In order to embrace the great changes that are here now, we have to become tolerant, and I would even change the word to accepting of very different ideas, accepting of different people, no longer typecasting people in boxes of you are a this and you are a that. It's moving beyond limits, limited thoughts which categorize into them and us. It's time, I feel, to look at the great array of human beings in this world and celebrate that difference and know that collectively, when we come together, incredible innovation will emerge. I'm sure Edward de Bono would be very pleased if he was to witness this coming together of great diversity, and through the contrasting viewpoints, incredibly new ideas will emerge. And this is how we really create, I feel, security for the future, is really developing a future that breaks all boundaries, where there's no limits to ideas, where we drop all judgment and we go, what if? What if? What if we do this? Okay, you're saying something I've never heard of before. I don't know what I think about that, but I'm going to sit with it. And then let's see where that takes us. It really is learning to think and see differently. In my values-based work that I was pioneering, it was learning to look into the world through a filter of values. It was not just saying we should be ethical, and this is the social levy of ethics that we all agree upon. The work I was doing, and will probably continue to do, is actually integrating values and then looking out upon the world and then making decisions or creating new ideas on the basis of this filter. Because I believe that the feeling, emotional, sensory aspect of ourselves provides a more holistic way of seeing. We see more. We see more in each other. We see change in another way. Because when I feel empathy, I look at another and I stand in their shoes. I don't just dismiss them. I imagine what it is to be that other and how would I feel. And the minute I do that, there's a joining that happens. And empathy softens you. If I look at it with responsibility, and I call it the ability to respond, I can do something. If I feel a sense of responsibility, I have the ability to respond, I will move myself to speak up. If I'm operating out of a value of awareness, and that would be when I go still and silent, I'm actually moving into an awareness. I'm feeling in an expanded way. And that awareness might come to me through sudden insights. I often wake up in the morning and I have great insights. I go, oh, okay, that's how that works. Awareness brings that. It's not a thinking or a knowledge. It's probably a higher knowledge in a sense, but everybody has it. It's not unique to me or anything. And then if I look through the filter of love, which is my predominant filter, that and truth are my two really strong filters. If I look at something through love, let's say I look at someone who's, looks disheveled, say they're poor, and I look at them through love. I start to see the human being. I don't see the disheveled anymore. So what I see is the amplification of the value of the human. It's literally looking in a different, like at a different angle, but you see differently. I know as a clown, that was why the clowning was a great experience, because I was constantly in that filter of love and then looking out at people, and I saw nothing that was unacceptable to me. In fact, I used words like gorgeous and, lovely to communicate to people because that was the beauty inside myself that I was recognizing in the eyes of the other. And so they became accepted. They weren't excluded. They were included. And there's a healing in that. This is the bringing together of humanity. And honesty means that I'm being visible. I'm showing myself, like in my previous video, I cried. I'm a great believer in authenticity. Be who you are as you feel it. Today, I'm feeling obviously more grounded. But I don't regret when I feel sad like that, because creativity emerges through me. Greater honesty emerges through me when I allow vulnerability to be seen. And vulnerability is the greatest strength. It's not the bravado that's strength. It's actually allowing people to see you as you are. There's nothing to protect. And there's a strength in that allowance. So I was talking honesty and oneness. If I look at the world through a sense of oneness, that's why I talk about unity. We are one. I treat what I see in you as in me. What you see in me is in you. There is a recognition. But if we're harboring judgments or negativity, we tend to look through that prism at the other. That's why toxic cultures, often people are not seeing things as they are. They're seeing things as they are. But because they're not conscious of how they see, they believe what they see is the other, and it's not. They haven't done the inner work to clear out their feelings of insecurity or inadequacy, not good enough, and often that not good enough projects as others are not good enough. So perfectionism that we see in bullying often is coming from not good enough or inadequate. But because it's not questioned and it's not understood and it's not conscious, people will act out of unconsciousness and they will harm one another, believing there's a justification for that. But it's just unexamined. I've often talked to Byron Katie, examining the thought process. That's the same thing as using those negative filters will come in if thoughts are not examined. So what I've really tried to reflect through the flow of this conversation with you is to, in a sense, create a painting and bring in more colours as to the holistic aspect of what true democracy really is, which is, as I pointed out, a very deep listening. That deep listening is to yourself and to the other, enabling you to really hear and understand another without it becoming something you have to quickly interrupt because you have to have your say. That's power. Humility will stop and pause and really hear. And then on the other side of that is the dialogue, learning through like conflict resolution, how to dialogue with people to get your needs met, and at the same time to work out how to resolve conflict, which are really just differences of opinion. If it escalates into abuse, that means there's deeper stuff going on where there's an intention of harm taking place. And this is, forms of violence in our society are coming from that. Misunderstanding is just, oh, I thought you said that. Oh, I'm sorry about that. I apologise. I misunderstood. That's why we say sorry, because we make a mistake and we own it. And there's an empowerment in the owning of it. If we don't own it, we don't learn, and we keep going on in a misguided fashion that the world has to support what I think, and anyone that disagrees with what I think, I reject, where the true democracy accepts that as you have a right to your opinion. You may have a different experience. I can't negate or say you're wrong, but that's different and that's interesting. A democratic framework would say, well, that's interesting. It's not my truth at this time, but I respect that that's probably what you've come to understand, and we're all different. See, there's a real allowance and space around a democratic way of thinking. So again, going back to the palette, I've tried to colour in here lateral thinking as means of breaking out of box thinking in the times that we're in, which are demanding of great innovation, great brilliance in respect of bringing creativity in to resolve and solve the problems that besiege us. But we're being blocked in many respects by the unquestioned thinking, the negative thought forms that project onto others stories that aren't true. And this actually is why we're having a lot of conflict around the world, is we have not dealt with the drivers that are causing the actual conflict, because we're not prepared to own our part. We're still blaming the other and calling it an enemy. There are no enemies. There are only unquestioned thoughts. That's the truth of it. We fight in all sorts of forums in order to win because of fears that we've never examined within ourselves and beliefs we've always held that we think are true, and they're our mantras. But if there's harm that's coming out of as a result of that, well, then it has to be examined. So I think I've come full circle with this, and in a sense it's an offering to all those who can hear of why it's time to create a global democracy where we really harness the power of the collective as a shared responsibility within a framework of values, universal values, that pulls us together to be able to see ourselves in each other and to stop fighting. It's a point of great maturity of which we're moving into now. It's kind of a growing up period right now. So with that, I send everybody great love and peace, authenticity, contrast and democracy, with the vision of a future that moves us beyond belief. So thank you again for listening and watching. If you got this far, I send you much love. Thank you.